Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get things started. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this community meeting on the city's housing element. My name is Paul Samaras. I'm a principal planner in the city's Development Services Department and the project manager for the housing element update. Myself and the rest of the city team are really glad to have your participation, and we look forward to receiving your input, your thoughts on some important housing issues tonight. Some of these issues include what you think the city's housing needs are, what types of housing are missing in our city, and who are those populations that need housing the most. What priorities or goals the city should have as it prepares its housing plan for the next several years, and what areas of the city are the most appropriate for new housing. So briefly, our agenda for tonight includes a presentation on what is a housing element, what are its components, and why we need to have one. A site inventory, which is basically a preliminary map of potential housing locations in the city. And we also want to share with you the preliminary results from a survey that the city released a few weeks ago. And so far, we've had a lot of responses to the survey, which shows the community is really engaged on this topic of housing. And finally, we want to give you a brief outline of the schedule for this planning effort and the milestones along the way. You should know the state of California requires cities to adopt a new housing element around the end of this year. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session where we'll be happy to take your questions and hear your thoughts on housing. A few words on the format for tonight's meeting. This is a webinar style meeting, but we really want to hear from you. In other cities or other workshops, allow residents to listen in, watch a presentation, and type in questions or comments. You will be able to do that tonight after the presentation by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and just typing in a question or comment. But we also want to hear from you. So if you prefer to speak rather than type in your comments, you can also click on the raise hand button at the bottom. And when the time comes, we will call on you to speak. I just ask that in the interest of time, and in order to give everybody a chance to participate, to try to keep your comments to about a minute or less. I should also mention that tonight will not be the only opportunity you have to participate and provide input. There will be several opportunities to do so this year, and we'll go over that later. But I encourage you to visit our housing element webpage to learn more and to take our survey, which will be open and available until mid-May. Also, during this presentation, we will be asking some polling questions just to gauge kind of the mood of the room, kind of get your thoughts on some of these issues. And if you don't mind, I wanted to go ahead and kind of test a couple of questions just to make sure the polling works and just to get to know you as well. So if you could put up the first poll question for us, Jonathan. Just to get a sense of what people think of El Segundo in general. Can you let us know when they're done, Jonathan, and maybe we can share the results of the polling?
I would give it about 5 more seconds and then I'll close it.
Okie doke. Okay, so it looks like more than half of the room thinks El Segundo is super awesome. Okay, thank you for testing that out for us. And just wanted to get another question in just to ask about yourself, about where you live or how long you've lived in town. So if we could get that next question in real quickly, and then we'll get going on our presentation. Okay, did you take a shot of that, Jonathan? Okay, great. Well, thank you for responding to those two quick questions. With that, I will hand things off to Veronica Tam from Veronica Tam and Associates, who will start the presentation for tonight. And then I will rejoin you at the end for the question and answer session. Go ahead, Veronica.
Great, thank you. If you can take away the poll questions, because somehow it's still blocking my screen. Maybe I can take it out. Okay, great. Next slide then. I'm Veronica with Veronica Tam Associates. With me is also my staff, Jamie Fowler. Will be certainly happy to answer questions later on. But what I would like to do right now is just to give you an overview of what is the housing element, why are we here, and what does it actually entails when we are talking about updating a housing element. The housing element is part of your general plan. It's part of the 7 required elements of the entire general plan. It has some major kind of overriding requirements. One, that it must meet the regional housing needs in the city that is given to the city, that you must provide for housing growth in the next 8 years. We also need to assess the housing needs in the community and what would be the best way to address those needs, not only for the existing residents, but for future residents to come into the community. So the housing element sets goals, objectives, policies, and actions for the next 8 years, that how we're going to address the needs. But what sets the housing element apart from the rest of the general plan is that your general plan usually has a longer time frame, has a like 20 to 25 year planning horizon. The housing element has an 8-year time frame, and it has to be updated with a statutory deadline every 8 years. And for now, for LA County, the deadline we're looking at is October 15, 2021. The other thing that is a little bit different from the rest of the general plan is that the rest of the general plans has guidelines. The housing element has statutory requirements. And as part of that statutory requirements, the housing element must be sent to the state for review to make sure that you comply with the state law. The agency responsible for that is the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And you'll hear the term, like the acronym HCD very frequently as we move through the process of, well, the presentation tonight, and certainly through the process of updating the housing element in the next few months. Next slide. So again, what is the housing element? What does it do and what it doesn't do? Now, the housing element is a policy document that sets the goals, policies, and direction for housing growth and preservation of housing and affordability of housing, a lot of different aspects of housing in the community. But it is not a document that requires city to build housing. The private market builds housing, the city doesn't build housing. We set the framework, we set the land use policies and regulations. We remove obstacles for developers, but it doesn't require the city to build housing. It also does not obligate the city to provide funding. The city may have funding available to incentivize housing to be built in the community, but it doesn't provide funding for necessarily for all the projects. It really just basically set the stage of what are the regulatory framework? What is the land use policies? What are the processes that developers have to go through in order to get housing built in the community? It doesn't obligate the city to build the housing itself. Next slide. So just to reiterate, there are some overriding requirements in the housing element that what the city does have to do, that we have to be able to accommodate projected housing demand as mandated by the state through the regional housing needs allocation or regional housing needs assessment process. This acronym is called RHNA, Regional Housing Needs allocation. So again, you will hear the term, the acronym RHNA very frequently in the next few months, and we'll go into a little bit more detail later on what that is. We need to, in the housing element, we need to have the framework to facilitate housing production. We also need to preserve existing affordable housing in the community, because it is important to preserve and improve what you currently have. So there should be goals, policies, and also actions and to preserve the existing housing in the community and improve the conditions of existing housing. There are also goals, policies, and actions relating to facilitating housing for all income types. This is to recognize that there are very low, moderate, and above moderate income households in the community. All socioeconomic segments of the community should have access to housing. And so the housing element must address the housing needs of all income level and housing types. And finally, we should have fair housing opportunities in the community. Once you created the new housing units, once you have preserved a good quality housing inventory in the community, you also need to make sure that there is equal access to that housing for all. Next. So when the housing element has very restrictive or stringent statutory guidelines, there are also consequences for not meeting the requirements. What the most difficult, when we sent the housing element to the state, they looked at the housing element and reviewed it, and then ultimately the goal for that review is to obtain a finding of substantial compliance to state law. So what does that mean if you do not if you're unable to obtain that finding of substantial compliance? It means risk of litigation. The state has given the HCD to monitor, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, to monitor jurisdictions that are not complying with housing element requirements. And they can refer the city to the State Attorney General for litigation. They can be referred to the State AG for litigation, which has happened recently. The city of Huntington Beach was not able to get a housing element certified by the state. After years of inaction, the AG sued the city of Huntington Beach, and they had to settle with the state. There are other jurisdictions, like the city of Pleasanton was also sued by the Attorney General maybe a little longer ago, but their consequence was quite serious. The city, while they were negotiating the settlement agreement, the city was not able to issue any building permit for over years. And that's not just residential building permit, that is all building permits, because the housing element is part of the general plan. If you have an element, if you have an integral element of your general plan that's out of compliance with state law, it renders the entire general plan at risk of being out of compliance. And so therefore, if you cannot get the housing element certified by the state, and if you're being sued by the state, you may lose the ability to issue building permits until you resolve the issues. There are other consequences, such as inability to receive state funds. The SB2 funds that was recently authorized by state law, and also some other infrastructure and transportation funds that the city may not be eligible to apply for it. There are also other competitive funds that, even if you're eligible to apply for it, without a housing element that comply with state law, you would not be in any kind of position to be competitive in that application. Next slide. Now, we talked a lot about the acronym Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Let me try to kind of make it a relatively simple process of how this regional housing needs allocation is done. It is a state law mandated process. Essentially, what the housing element requirement is that every single jurisdiction in the state of California has a responsibility to take care of the housing needs of the entire state. This regional housing needs allocation, by definition, is your responsibility for the state's housing growth or the region's housing growth need for being part of the region. It does not necessarily mean that it's housing that's generating from within the community. It's not housing needs that is generated from within the city of El Segundo. It's your housing responsibility as part of the region. The process started with the state. The state would estimate how much housing is needed over the next 8 to 10 years for the entire state. And that number is being allocated to the regional planning agencies. For us in the Southern California, the regional planning agencies we're dealing with is the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG. It's a 6-county region: Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, Ventura, and Imperial. San Diego has its own regional planning agency. So within this 6-county region, we got an allocation from the state, how much growth the region has to be responsible for. And that number is 1.34 million units over the next 8 years for the 6-county region. And LA County, as part of the region, gets an allocation. We got 812,000 units and change. And within that, as part of the LA County, the city of El Segundo, that's an allocation. Our number is 492 units. It's a lot higher than what you had before, but the regional housing needs allocation process has been in place since 1969. So every time you update the housing element in the last 40, 50 years, actually 60 years or so, you have an allocation. And we are in the 6th cycle of the housing element right now. The 490 units of new housing is what we need to be responsible for. From a planning perspective, not from a production perspective. We must make sure that our land use policies and our development regulations are in place to potentially accommodate 492 units should the market call for it. The city's obligation is to make sure that it removes obstacles and allow those units to occur if the market calls for it. And so looking at your neighbors, we're a little bit more comparable to Hermosa Beach and Manhattan Beach, but even looking at the population, we are smaller than those communities in terms of population. Other jurisdictions like Inglewood and Redondo Beach has a much bigger allocation, particularly Inglewood. So we'll go into the next slide and explain that a little further. What does that mean? How does the regional housing needs allocation works? The regional housing needs allocation arena, like I mentioned before, you have to be able to demonstrate that you have the ability to accommodate 492 units over the next 8 years from a planning perspective. It's also divided into income groups: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. These are the categories that based on the overall region's income distribution and also how the city's income distribution compared to that. It doesn't mean that you're gonna have to build the units in that income distribution. What it does mean is that your planning and land use policy must provide some kind of a density in order, it's using density as a proxy. For example, when we talk about lower income housing, we're talking about the allocation of 277 units of lower income units, very low and low income. It's not saying that we're going to build those units at that income level because the market built the housing, the city doesn't build the housing. What we want to do is make sure that there are zoning categories of land that is zoned at appropriate density that can facilitate the development of lower income housing. What it does mean is that, to some extent, your density has to be high enough that it can provide for housing at a certain density that would be feasible for lower income. And given the population of El Segundo currently at 16,000 or so, we're talking about 20 units to the acre as a feasible density for lower income. And it just means that at that density, a developer or a nonprofit developer has a better chance to go to the state and apply for funding for affordable housing development with a reasonable amount of subsidies. If the density is not high enough, then the subsidies would be too high and they wouldn't get a competitive application for funding. Again, the requirement is not to produce the unit, but make sure that our land use policy are such that it allows certain high density housing to occur. That would facilitate potentially lower income should there be a market for it. So based on your current income distribution of the RENA, we're talking about 56 units of lower income and about 44 units of moderate and above moderate income. Now, this slide also shows generally the income range for a household of 4 in LA County based on the 2020 income limit. When we talk about a low income household of 4, 2 people making 1 or 2 wage earners in a household making out up to $90,000 a year can still be considered a low income household in LA County. So we're really talking about the working poor or the working class that are not necessarily able to afford housing in LA just because our housing market is such that a lot of the households are not able to afford housing at the market without spending a lot of money of their income, a large proportion of their income on housing. But income distribution wise, we're looking at about 56% of them being lower income, meaning that the planning for it has to be going into a little bit higher density kind of category. Next slide. So actually before, that really concludes my portion of the presentation regarding the technical requirements of the housing element. If you have questions later on after the presentation, I'll be happy to answer more of that. But before we go into the next segment of the housing element, we would like to know a little bit about your ideas about housing situation in El Segundo today, and what are the issues and challenges, and kind of like, these are the questions that we want to get an idea why you're attending the meeting tonight. So thank you, Jonathan, for pulling the poll. If we can launch the poll.
Yeah, I've launched it.
Okay, yeah, I didn't start seeing something.
Let me give another about 10 to 15, 20 seconds.
Sure. We have a little bit more than half people voted so far.
All right, I'm gonna be closing it.
Okay. Can you share the results? Great. So generally, I think we more than half of the respondents suggested that high cost of housing is the challenge in El Segundo, and followed by availability of rental housing. So there's not a lot of rental housing, but and closely following that would be availability of ownership housing. So I guess that's generally the high cost of housing and availability of housing are the top challenges. Which are the groups that has the highest needs? Seniors, young adults. Those are the two groups that have the highest need or unserved needs in the city of El Segundo right now. So thank you. We can close the poll, and with that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Layla over at CSG, and she's going to talk a little bit about the community outreach process the city has undertaken. And also then, you know, we have the issue. We have to meet the regional housing needs allocation. This is a challenge. And what are the potential strategies that city is considering in meeting that challenge? And certainly we would, you know, ask for your opinion on that later on as well. Layla?
Thank you, Veronica. I'm Layla Carver at CSG Consultants, and I'm here with Gina Kassar and Jonathan Kwan, my colleagues as well at CSG. I'm going to play the video that we've shared in our outreach efforts. You may have already watched it online, but we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to watch it. So I hope that you can hear it.
Shape the future of housing in El Segundo. Help the city identify areas within the community appropriate for housing by participating in the Housing Element Update 2021 through 29. Every 8 years, California law requires that all cities and counties update their plan to address housing needs for everyone in the community. Help El Segundo come up with a plan to provide enough affordable housing options for our working families, seniors, and young professionals to ensure children who grew up here can afford to remain in this community. If we don't get a new housing plan approved that provides housing options across all incomes, the city could be fined, lose state funding opportunities, lose the ability to issue permits, and in the end, lose local control over having a say where new housing should go. The decisions we make in the coming months will shape El Segundo's future. Let's work together to make sure El Segundo's housing plan is the best one for our city. Visit elsegundo.org/housing-element and share your ideas today.
Thank you. I want to talk about another key component of the housing element that is required. The site inventory is a key part of the housing element. And the housing inventory is basically a list of parcels that can be redeveloped with an analysis of why it's really possible to redevelop those sites. Some questions that we ask during the analysis include, what is the likelihood that the site will be developed during the planning period during the next 8 years? And if the site were to be developed during the next 8 years, how many new units of housing are likely to be built on it? The criteria that has been set by the state, the HCD, Housing and Community Development Department, requires that sites have realistic development capacity and site suitability based on criteria such as city's zoning code and policy, lot size, the actual size of the parcel, the environmental constraints of the site, and adequate infrastructure, and also current development trends in and around that site. Other site criteria based on best practices to look at possible sites can be based on the following factors and some of the criteria that the city is looking at for the site inventory. That is underutilized sites, sites that contain older existing buildings that could be redeveloped in the next 8 years, sites that have the potential for mixed use, such to include residential with retail or other uses, and also sites located in close proximity to amenities such as grocery stores, public services, religious places, schools, and healthcare. So based on those criteria, the criteria that is set by the state and also best practices, the staff is looking at sites within the city, but we are looking for your input. We're looking for your feedback on the site inventory that we're looking at right now, and also other sites that you think would fit these criteria. So I'll show a map here based on those criteria. And here is the current possible sites. And the sites are identified by the current zoning district. And that's the colors that you see on the map. And the sites that have the hatch marks are sites that are currently in review. They're currently pending projects in the city. And the next two slides are just a little bit more zoomed in, sites that are located near or in downtown and also along Grand. And you may not be able to see the streets here, but this is Main and Grand basically. And also the next slide is a zoomed in area of sites that are near PCH. And with that, I will hand the PowerPoint over to Gina Kassar. Thank you.
Thanks, Layla. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And hopefully you've had a chance to take the survey. And if you haven't, there will be an opportunity until May 17th at midnight. So we'll provide the address to take the survey. But yeah, we've had a great turnout and we're really excited. Over 500 respondents so far. So we'll give you a quick glimpse of the preliminary results. So next slide, please, Layla. So one of the questions was, what 3 words would you use to describe El Segundo? So this graphic here represents some of the answers, and the larger the word, the more frequently it popped up in the results. So you see a lot of positive words, safe, community, friendly, those things came up a lot. So it's nice, it's pretty exciting to see positive results. Next slide, please. So our next question, we had a ranking of from 1 to 5, what areas did you think new housing should be built? So our top 3 answers, we have number 1 is east of PCH, and that's pretty much the whole length of PCH in the city. Second was in the Smoky Hollow area, and its 3rd place was along PCH, like right along PCH, not east, but those sites that you saw that popped up, happened to pop up in the inventory. Next slide, please. Another ranking question. We asked, what type of housing do you think El Segundo needs most? So the top 3 answers, number 1, housing that's affordable to public service workers. And in 2nd place, it wasn't too far behind, housing that's affordable to professionals working in aerospace, high tech, Chevron, and similar industries. And in 3rd place was multifamily housing with at least 3 bedrooms that can accommodate families. Next slide, please. We asked, what is the highest priority when it comes to housing? And number 1 answer is proximity to amenities. So we brought that up, grocery stores, schools, things that you need every day. And in 2nd place was on-site amenities like adequate parking, benches, bikes, sidewalks, things that make your life easier. And of course, 3rd was access to public transportation, and last was proximity to public safety amenities like police and fire. Next, please. So we asked for the top 3 things that you want to see in El Segundo, the top types of housing. So our top 3, of course, were not surprising. Number 1 was repurposing of offices to our office and commercial sites into mixed use. So mixed use could be any other residential with any type of other type of use, like commercial or retail. And number 2 was repurposing of office and commercial just to straight residential. And then number 3 was workforce housing in the Smoky Hollow area. Next slide, please. And we asked, how important are the following concerns? So this was another ranking question. You see, to the left is not important, to the right, it slides over, very important. So most important, maintaining the character of the community, the residential and the commercial districts. So that's not surprising. And then we had a tie for number 2, ensuring that the housing market provides a diverse range of housing and also fair and equitable housing. Next slide, please. And finally, this is the last question that we'll look at today for these preliminary results. We looked at the current goals of the current adopted housing element. So the last 8-year cycle, cycle 5. And we asked, how applicable are these goals? And number 1, conserving and improving the existing condition of affordable housing stock. That was, still fairly applicable. And as you can see, all the other goals are, about the same range. We want promoting equal housing opportunity, assisting in the development of affordable housing. These things still remain fairly applicable, but that's part of the update process. We're looking at goals for the next 8 years. So we've got to look in the past to continue in the future. So with that, I go to the next slide. And just wanted to provide a small overview of our outreach efforts to date. So we've got our first outreach meeting here that you're so gracefully attending. We have our housing element update webpage, the survey, we've had the video that you watched, and some social media pushes, some postcards and notices. And we'll continue to with these outreach efforts. And with that, I will hand it back over to Paul. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Before I get going on the next slide, I just wanted to ask Jonathan if you could put up our last poll question regarding appropriate housing locations in the city. That'll be great to see how our group tonight feels about that particular question.
All right, we got over half, so I'm going to be closing it in about 10 seconds. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, so it looks like the top 3 sort of vote getters, if we call it that, are along PCH, east of PCH, and in Smoky Hollow. Okay, well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that particular question. With that, I will go on to the next slide to give you a sense of our outreach opportunities or your opportunities to participate in the near future. So first off, after we receive your input tonight and for the next few weeks, we'll be working on developing a draft housing element that's going to be led primarily by Veronica Tam's group. And we hope to present that draft element at another community meeting at a planning commission meeting. After that, we will have to submit the draft housing element to HCD for review, and then hopefully finalize it by late summer and early fall, followed by public hearings before the Planning Commission and the City Council in late fall this year. So that kind of covers our main milestones before the housing element is adopted. And it shows you that there are plenty of opportunities for you and others to participate in the process and offer your input to our decision makers. So with that, I wanted to thank you for your patience during this PowerPoint presentation and for taking in a lot of information. This slide shows you some ways you can participate even after this meeting is over. You can visit our website and learn a little bit more about the housing element and this process. You can also email us at housingelement@elsegundo.org with any questions or additional comments, or you can call me and you see my number there on the screen. So thank you so much for that. And with that, we want to take your questions. Feel free to either type in a question using that Q&A button at the bottom, or hit the raised hand button if you would like to speak. We will try to kind of alternate between written questions and speakers just to give everybody a chance. I should just let you know that we've scheduled this meeting to last until around 5 p.m. I mean 7 p.m., I apologize. So we will try our best to answer all your questions if we can, but if your question is not answered or if you have more questions and comments, please feel free to email us, like I said, or go on our website, take our survey. And obviously there's a lot more opportunities to speak at public meetings. So with that, I'll turn it over to John, who will kind of moderate the questions for us. And we can try as a team, to tackle the questions depending on who knows the answer or who hits the button first.
Yeah, I'll start with some Q&A questions that were typed in because they were coming in during the presentation. So the first one's by Laura Freeman. Her question is, how long has the housing element been in existence?
I'll take that, Jonathan. In fact, I think I can take the next couple of slides, questions. Well, the housing element, I think during my presentation, I mentioned before, the housing element law has been in existence since 1969. And there have been some delays in updating the housing element based on changes of state law or economic recessions and stuff like that. So we're currently on the 6th cycle. Prior to the last couple of cycles, the housing element was supposed to be updated every 5 years, but then 10 years, and now it's an 8-year cycle. So currently the law says 8 years. We're on the 6th cycle of the update. We have to get it done by October 15 this year. It does have a grace period, but the statutory deadline is October 15, 2021, and it covers all the way to October 15, 2029. And so the second question is related to ADU. The 492 units, are ADUs included in that? Yes. You do get to count ADUs as part of your ability to meet the regional housing needs allocation. However, you can only count it not based on capacity. So you cannot say that because we have 2,000 single family lots in the city, therefore we can possibly have 2,000 ADUs. For ADUs, accessory dwelling units, for those who don't know what that means, ADUs can only be counted based on the trend. So if between 2018 and 2020, what is our trend? If you've been building only 5 ADUs in the last every year, like for the last 3 years, then you can only possibly count 40 ADUs over the next 8 years. So ADU is included, but it has to be based on trend, not capacity. I'll go into the next one, but then the one on the assisted living facility, I think I'll help city staff answer that. What about elderly who can no longer afford to live here? And that's exactly the reason why we're doing the housing element, looking at which are the groups that have the most, that have needs for housing. By providing all opportunities for all income groups and household types, particularly for higher density housing, then the city would have the ability to attract developers who may want to come here and build either assisted living facilities or senior apartments or senior condos that allow seniors to move into housing that may be smaller or that may require less maintenance, that would be more appropriate for them to do. So that's, the housing element certainly covers that topic as well. So with that, I think some of the questions are probably more for other people to respond.
If it's okay, Jonathan, I'll just take the question about the affordable housing development there at the former Imperial school site, and then maybe we can take a couple of speakers.
Yeah, let's do that.
The short answer to your question, or the question was, the former Imperial school site was to be assisted living, higher density, along with some low income percentage in it. Why was it discarded in order to build lower density and higher cost townhomes? The short answer to that is that the city approved what is called a specific plan for that property at the El Segundo School District's request. And that specific plan allowed, you are correct, for a assisted living facility or a lower density and townhome option. So there were basically two options that were approved, and the school district could pursue to develop either one. In the end, the school district decided to sell the property to a developer that pursued that second option. So there were two options available, and in the end, the property owner, the school district, opted to sell the property to a developer that will build that second option. So that's kind of the short answer to that. Jonathan, do you want to see?
Yeah, right now I see Sebastian Gomez at the top. So right now I'm going to click allow you to talk, and you should be able to unmute yourself right after. Right, you should be able to unmute yourself, Sebastian.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for putting this together. Yeah, I was, for the longest time, I was trying to figure out how to, turn on my video, but I guess only the panel is allowed to have the video on. It makes total sense. So my name is Sebastian Gomez. I work at a company here in El Segundo called Contour Crafting Corporation. We are in the business of 3D printing buildings. So I was under the impression that this talk would be more on the side of the production side of building these 492 houses. So I just have, naturally, I have this question. I understand that there will be a lot of constraints in terms of, building codes that will need to be laxed to carry out this project. But wouldn't the production side of things be also a priority in this process?
If you mean whether the city will sort of incentivize developers to produce, that is actually the reason why we're holding this meeting and why we're engaging the community. We want to get a sense from the community of what the city's priorities should be, whether they want the city to be very actively engaged in assisting in the development of housing, or to simply incentivize them in some way and allow them to be developed, So that's part of the reason why we're here. But one thing I should mention is that the city is taking this responsibility of providing for more housing in the city and meeting these state obligations. We have several sort of programs that are housing related underway in order to kind of make things a little bit easier for the private sector to move forward with production. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
Go ahead,
thank you.
All right. I'm going to take another hand that's up, and then we can go back to the Q&A questions. So the next one is Neil Cadman.
Okay. Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Paul. Hi, everybody. Thanks for doing this. It's very informative. And my question is maybe too preliminary, but I was wondering at this point of the process, are the consultants aware of some of the intricacies of this city that constrain some development on the east side of Sepulveda? Like, for example, any residential on the east side of Sepulveda or PCH, I'm sorry, I'm still in the Sepulveda mode, are those children would be part of the Weisburn School District. And so our town has always been negative towards residential development on that side because El Segundo Unified would not get those kids. And of course, me being a huge school advocate, that's something that's a huge issue for me. Are those types of things really too preliminary in this process for you guys, and that's way down the road? Or do those types of things come into this process right now with you consulting with the city? And again, I appreciate it, and I look forward to furthering this process.
I'll just take a quick stab at this, and anybody else who wants to jump in. Our consultants are aware, generally speaking, that there are some constraints with developing housing on the east side of town, but that's what this process is about. We want to hear from you and others on what the advantages are and what the disadvantages may be of developing in different parts of town. So we appreciate you kind of raising the issue and letting us know about that. And we'll be happy to follow up on that particular topic with you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Let's go back to some Q&A questions. So the first one that's up is from Paul. Can you post the slides to a web page? And
yeah, definitely.
It's going to be posted online after this meeting, correct? Link we can share.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Jonathan.
Is there a link we can share to a city website, or is?
Yeah, it's elsegundo.org/housing-element.
Great, I'll put that on in response to the question. Next, we have an anonymous question. It looks like there are only a few hundred units in the housing element update. Are you going to designate more than that?
I can take that. We actually do have to have a buffer. And so that's required by the state in doing an adequate site analysis. So even though our RENA is 492, we cannot show the state we only have the capacity for 492 units. So in our sites identification, we will have more than 492. The state at this point recommends 15 to 30% of a buffer. So typically we do around at least a 20% buffer.
Next question is from David Popo, I believe. It's what is identified on site inventory as East Imperial?
I can take that, Jonathan. I believe right now there are no sites on Imperial Avenue. Imperial Avenue is within the airport the noise contour for LAX. So right now there is no sites within our inventory. However, if you have sites in mind, please let us know.
All right. There are poll questions regarding housing east of PCH, but I didn't see any on the inventory map. Can you please explain?
And I can take that one. That's part of this process where we have been doing a lot of research looking into the pros and cons of adding housing to the inventory that's in that area. So it's part of the process. There may be policy changes that would need to occur in order to accommodate housing east of PCH, but at this time it's still, you know, we're evaluating and conducting a lot of research.
Great. The next one's from Rachel Atsila. I see that she's also raised her hand, so I'm actually just going to jump back over to the raised hands here. And let me allow Rachel to speak. All right, Rachel, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for doing this. I had a question about, it seemed like in the past, like I remember going to some of our meetings to kind of speak about what type of, like it seemed like El Segundo was doing this project to a smaller degree with the housing development that was off of Imperial. And I think you talked about it a little bit, but I'm just not clear what happened, because it seemed like there was this whole process of what they were going to do, how many units were going to be available. And we were voting on whether they, you know, kind of hold to the original agreement, or if we were going to kind of just take their money and then let them do whatever they want with the houses. And it seemed like the last meeting, we were like, we want them to honor their original agreement. And then I don't remember hearing anything else after that. So because
Sure.
of COVID.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll be happy to take that one. Yeah, so that same site, the old school district site on Imperial, when that single family and townhome development was approved by the city council, there was a requirement that 6 of the units in that development would be affordable, would be sort of reserved and restricted for that purpose. The developer, while in construction, basically told the city that they were having kind of a hard time, let's say, meeting their numbers, and and they were basically going to essentially not going to be able to provide those affordable units because they were a very big cost to the development. So they requested that the city lift that requirement. And there were negotiations that ensued. There was a lot of back and forth. And in the end, the city decided to sort of relieve the developer of that obligation. But in exchange, the developer had to contribute a little bit over $5 million to the city that is now dedicated in an affordable housing fund that will help the city to find other sites and encourage or incentivize development of affordable units elsewhere in town.
Is that 5 million comparable to what it would have, what the same type of costs for the lower income housing that would have been developed at that site?
I couldn't give you an exact answer, but one of the advantages of having, let's call it that seed money to assist the city in an affordable housing program is that the city can leverage those funds. So they can use those funds as matching funds and pursue grant opportunities and to basically accumulate more funding, let's say from the state, and then help fund new housing developments.
So one of the things that was unique about that was it was an opportunity for people to actually own houses in El Segundo who didn't necessarily meet the typical income of this city. Mm-hmm. Moving forward, will that be available to residents like myself who rent here, but you know, would like an opportunity to buy and need like a little bit of a little bit of a buffer there, you know, is that going to be available at all? Because that was one of the things that was so great about that initial agreement that El Segundo made with the developer.
To make a housing that is affordable for purchase, is that what you mean?
For ownership, correct.
For ownership. It is possible, but I just wanted to let you know the city is in the process of negotiating with a nonprofit affordable housing developer. And they will be the city's partner in identifying housing opportunities, affordable housing opportunities, or locations that can be perhaps purchased and refurbished or redeveloped. And they will help the city identify those locations. And if it is possible to get housing that is for purchase, for ownership, that will happen. It is a little bit easier to provide housing that is rental, that is affordable. Just because, yeah, so it is possible. I can't guarantee that right now, but we are developing that plan and we are starting that process.
That's included. Ketis, stop it. Sorry, you guys. That's included in what fur baby, you know. That's included in what you guys are looking forward to doing right now, while as you're planning to kind of increase the housing opportunities for us residents in El Segundo or people who work here and aren't even able to afford living here?
It is a separate but parallel process. So that is going on at the same time as this housing element update process. Yeah, thank you for that question.
All right, I'm going to go back to
thank you.
The Q&A questions. So the next one's from Maya Perez. How can we help young adults go back to town if the housing is very high?
And I think I'll take this one. And again, I think that's the reason why that's part of the objective of the housing element, is to identify opportunities for other housing to be built. When there's a supply issue, there's obviously, you know, cost for competition, and when we increase the housing stock, we'll have more ability to moderate the price. And I think that's you know, generally the scope. And certainly what Paul has mentioned about some of the affordable housing initiatives that the city will be pursuing in the next 6 months or so would also help provide housing that's more affordable. Part of the goal is to create more housing that is more that meets the needs of younger folks, because they may not need a gigantic home, they may not need a home with a lot of yards, but what younger people probably look for is, I think we heard it in the poll answers and the survey responses, that they're looking for housing that's close to amenities, housing that's close to jobs, housing that is affordable. So part of this housing element will hopefully expand the opportunities for that to happen, and the goal is to create an El Segundo that kind of attracts back some of the younger people to the community and allow some of the people who worked here to live here. And so you have a more vibrant and diverse community in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to do one more Q&A and then go back to the raised hands. So the next one's from Eddie White. What is the current height restriction for multifamily development?
That's 26 feet.
Great. And now I'm going to unmute Mona Eisman. Let's see. So Mona, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, thank you. So my questions are focused on the R1, R2 area of town. So it's a three-part question. One is, will ADUs be part of the additional housing for long-term rental, or will be, I was involved in the short-term rental battle, okay, discussions, or will that count because they may be eligible for short-term rental and not long-term rental? That's part one of the question. And when we look at density, will we be able to, will the R1 neighborhood will be looking at density and parking? because a R2 plot, what was approved, was 4 townhomes and not sufficient parking. And so density got crazy. So density got crazy within R1 because they converted an R2 or an R3, but there was only 1 house on the lot, to 4 townhomes, not enough parking, crazy density. And in many cities, to build housing towards that greater good effort, they are reducing parking requirements. As on ADUs, there aren't parking requirements. So clearly from a homeowner in R1, I want new housing, but I don't want to just include congestion. I just don't want it to result in congestion and parking problems in our R1. That's.
I'll answer the beginning part of the ADUs. The current laws of ADUs requires the city to relax a lot of the development standards and process. It has to be permitted by right. If it's located within half a mile from transit, you cannot require replacement parking, all of that. However, there is there's something that's new to the ADUs law that's been changed in recent years. You cannot use the ADUs for short-term rentals that are being permitted under the relaxed development standards.
Good.
And so that's that would address your concern. And I think your question about single-family neighborhoods, and I think that would be either Paul or CSG. I don't believe there are single-family neighborhoods that are being identified for intensification, but I'm not entirely sure at this time.
Yeah, I'll answer that. We did not find any R1 sites that met the criteria for inclusion in the sites inventory. However, there is one site that's already in the pipeline, it's under review, so that is included by proxy since it's already in the works.
So can I just ask parking again? Because Santa Monica built a lot of housing near transit without parking. And my friend lives there and she says she can't move her car anymore, okay? And so I get the bigger goal, but we still all own cars. Layla's shaking her head like she knows.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. And actually, that's one of the topics that we need to cover in this housing element. How do we address parking, height requirements, and other standards to facilitate housing production, but perhaps without generating negative impacts? So those are the things that we'll have to weigh during this process. So thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
And I'll just add to that. I want to just make sure everybody understands that every housing development or the housing project will go through an environmental analysis where the city will look at, like Paul mentioned, parking and traffic. So those issues will be analyzed, and if there is an impact, they will need to be mitigated as projects come online. They'll have to do their own analysis if necessary. And also the state is looking at reduction of development standards like parking as a way to incentivize housing, but also to get people to start taking transit. And I understand what you're saying, Mona.
I get it. It makes sense, but Santa Monica kind of went pretty far on that.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna
mute me
to talk. All right, so going back to the Q&A questions, the next one's from Kelly. Has the city considered another development like Park Vista in El Segundo?
I'll just start with that, and if anybody else wants to jump in, they can. The city, I don't believe at this time, is interested in developing, paying for itself and managing a large-scale affordable housing development. But working with our affordable housing provider partner, we will identify opportunities where the city can potentially help fund some projects. I'm not sure that they will be at the same scale as the Park Vista development.
The next one's from Eddie White. What is the general plan calling for right now for senior/veteran housing?
I'm not actually aware of the general plan itself calling for specific about senior housing and veteran housing, but the current housing element certainly talks about the special needs of seniors. I don't think we actually talked about veterans in the current housing element, but if it is an important group of to the City of El Segundo, we can certainly add that in the new housing element about the veterans' needs. And in many cases, veterans, a lot of them are retired with limited income, some with disability. So certainly housing that's appropriate for seniors would also appropriate for veterans. And so building and having opportunities for senior apartments, and generally that's higher intensity and smaller units, but also located probably closer to transportation, public transportation, and services and amenities. Those are the important things about locating housing for seniors.
Great. And then we had another question about, does the update propose any changes to current R1 zoning? So I'm just gonna check that.
I think that question was answered live.
Yeah. So I'll go back to the raised hands. The next one's Anya Goldstein. So let's see. You should be allowed to unmute yourself, Anya.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for doing this presentation. I really appreciate it. There's sort of an elephant in the room for me, which is the racial demographics of El Segundo. As I'm sure you all know, many of the tracts in El Segundo were developed with racially restrictive covenants that are just shocking if you're not educated on the issue, as I was not when I was seeing them, you know, that just are written right in. Well, you know, ownership and dwelling is restricted to members of the Caucasian race, except for servants, etc. Obviously, the Supreme Court said that racially restrictive housing covenants were illegal, but El Segundo has been known as a sundown town through at least the 70s. Some people would still say today. And I'm new to this area of housing policy, and I'm curious whether the city has any fair housing obligations, whether there are any requirements that the city test to see if rental units and sales are operating fairly, or whether the city has no obligations in that regard. And it's basically like, you know, if someone sues, they sue, but the city wipes its hands of it. Thank you.
Jonathan, I'll take that too. Yes, actually the state adopted a new state law back in 2017, AB 688, affirmatively furthering fair housing. That is now a component of analysis that we have to look at as part of the housing element, particularly looking at the siting and location of housing to make sure that it's not concentrated and certainly providing fair housing services is part of the requirement. However, it does not require cities to conduct testing. The cities, as part of the LA County program for city BG funds, which provides fair housing services through the Housing Rights Center. And the Housing Rights Center does do fair housing testing and monitoring if there are complaints. But it doesn't do proactive testing or auditing or that type of situation. And the housing element also does not obligate the city to do that.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. So what does affirmatively furthering fair housing mean?
It means that when we look at the housing element, we need to look at policies in the community that would one, provide housing mobility that allows, if you have a housing choice voucher, like what was more commonly known as Section 8 vouchers, that you have the ability to use it in the community. What about the type of housing? Are there a variety of housing types in the community addressing the housing needs, not only for people who are more regular, but well, I shouldn't say regular, but you know, a variety of housing types, including housing opportunities for people who are elderly, who are disabled, people who are large households, or whether they're families or not. And so there is a variety of things that we need to make sure in the housing element, that there are goals and policies and actions that lead to an environment that there's decent and accessible housing for all. We also need to look at some policies relating to gentrification as part of the new requirements under state law. We also need to look at making sure the opportunities for new housing, particularly high density housing, are also located in areas that have high resources and amenities. So those are some of the key requirements, new requirements of the housing element relating to fair housing.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move back on to the Q&A questions. Let's see. All right, so next we have a question from Kevin Shinnick. How much is the fine the city would pay if we don't comply with this housing mandate? What other cities in California have not complied with this state mandate in the past?
Okay, I'll take that too. There are 497 or 90 something, close to 500 jurisdictions in the entire state of California. We're currently in the 6th cycle housing element, so some of the jurisdictions, most of us are still working on it. For the 5th cycle housing element, as of 2018, there were about 40 something jurisdictions that did not comply. So a little bit less than 10% of that did not comply. And so they were all set up to be, some of them will refer to the state attorney general for litigation, including the city of Huntington Beach. The rest of them, the state was just really like pushing cities to work on compliance. So with all that efforts, I think there may be just a handful of jurisdictions that are still out of compliance, but the majority of them, more than 95% of the jurisdictions in the state of California, all have a housing element that complies with state law, because the stakes are too high right now. Now, in terms of fines, if you are sued, if you're not sued by the state, if you're not sued by a developer, if you're not sued by a nonprofit, if you're not sued, there's no fine involved. But if you are sued, the court can go can assess a fine that's up to, I think, $600,000 a month until you get the housing element resolved. Now, I did say that, like, if you're not sued, then you're okay. But I can also tell you that the housing element is the most frequently litigated element of the entire general plan. And so you can be sued by the state, you can be sued by a developer, you can be sued by a nonprofit, or you can be sued by anybody. In specifically, the state law changed that, I think more than 10 years ago, it says, any person or organization or agency with an interest in housing can bring a litigation against the jurisdictions on the housing element. So that kind of tells you how seriously that is, and certainly the housing element is the most frequently litigated element of the entire general plan.
Thank you. The next one is from David Popo. How about consideration of housing on Rosecrans? Consider the ArcLight / Pacific Theaters permanently closing as reported in the LA Times today.
I'll just jump in and just say that we're open to considering housing sites, anywhere in the city, as long as they are feasible. So we are willing to kind of investigate and look into the feasibility of different sites. And this is the first time I hear about the ArcLight theaters closing. That's kind of a surprise for me. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, the next one's, it's an anonymous question. It's, I've seen proposals to build low-income housing west of PCH near Mariposa. After the introduction of In-N-Out, that intersection is now so jammed with traffic that I do my best to avoid it. What would be done to alleviate the absolute gridlock that would occur if high-density housing was built there?
I'll just take that as well. Every new project of a certain scale and size has to go through an environmental review process, and traffic is one of those topics that are studied during the environmental review process. So if there are negative impacts identified, then usually there are mitigation measures that have to be taken to kind of reduce the impact to a level that is not significant. So with any new development of a certain size, we would go through that process and help ensure that there aren't those negative impacts that you're mentioning.
Great. I'm going to go back to the raised hands. So we have Sebastian Gomez. I'm not sure if the hand was raised again, but I'll just bring him up here. All right, Sebastian, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I'm back. Paul, you said something that piqued my interest, and that was regarding the developer that you're working with, the affordable housing developer that you're working with. Could you please expand on what their role is? You're muted, sir, by the way.
I believe that we have a representative from Many Mansions on tonight. So Alex Russell, if you're, if you want, if you're on, if you can kind of jump in and.
Yeah, let me give Alex at least the ability to unmute himself.
Let's give Alex a second because I think I'm kind of cold
Hello,
calling
can you hear me?
here. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Good evening, everyone. This has been a great session so far, great analysis, so I appreciate that. My name is Alexander Russell. I'm the Executive Vice President at Many Mansions, and we were recently selected by the city to help with an affordable housing strategic plan. And essentially, it's very similar to the housing element process in that we're looking for opportunities to encourage the development of more affordable housing in the city. And so we're going to be working with the staff and then the city council and doing community outreach to look for opportunities to build more affordable housing in our city, looking at some examples of what's worked in other communities, what hasn't worked, and really kind of going through an informative and engaging process. So there's no preconceived notions at this time. It's the very beginning of the process, and we're kind of hoping, that's why I'm listening here tonight, to make sure that we understand what the community's needs are, that we're not duplicating efforts, and that we're looking for what will work in this community. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Alex. So just to be clear, so you won't be the developer for this project?
It's possible that we could be. Many Mansions is an affordable housing builder, property manager, and services provider, but we have no exclusive arrangement with the city. There's many other good nonprofits out there, and I'm actually talking to a few as we're going through the Affordable Housing Strategic Plan process. I'm on the board of the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, and so we'll be kind of reaching out to them for ideas as well. But this is an inclusive process, so no, Many Mansions could be one of the potential builders, but definitely not the exclusive builder.
Sure, thank you very much. So I guess this is my last question for Paul. So in terms of what the next step will be in terms of this development process, what would it be? I know you guys mentioned that in May 27 there will be another session. So I'm just thinking what I could do, meanwhile, we would love to, 3D print buildings for the city. I'm sure, the news and the PR value for you guys would be gigantic, but obviously we want to embark on a project that makes sense for us as well. So I'm just being very forward here, yes.
I just want to say thank you for making yourselves available. I would just say, please stay engaged. Please participate. Give us your thoughts as we go through the process. And hopefully that'll help us produce a better housing element for the city.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you guys. I'm gonna remove you guys from here. All right, I know right now it's almost 7 o'clock and we still have about 16 questions. They seem to keep coming in. So I'm gonna try to get through these a little faster than before. The next one's by Laura Freeman. Will there be a need, will there need to be adjustments to existing multifamily apartments within this plan, or this only applies to new builds? So will this apply to existing sites or just new construction?
I'll take that. There's no plan to, if there's an existing multifamily project that's occupied and thriving, there's no plan to change it.
The next one is the density, and is density a marker of affordability, or is there an actual count of units that we can say are affordable?
We're using, I'll take that, Jonathan. With the state law, we use this density as a proxy because affordable housing requires a lot of subsidies to build. I think Manny Mansion can tell you that, and it's not easy to find funding for it. So what the state is basically requiring, the state law is basically requiring it is at least the density has to be there to allow high density housing to occur. Therefore, the amounts of subsidies required would be moderated based on economies of scale. It's not saying that the housing will be built at that density will have to be affordable, because generally, if there's not a subsidies involved or some kind of incentives involved, there would not be affordable housing at the market rate.
Thank you. So the next one, similar but lower goals were presented to the city when I was a member of the Planning Commission 15 years ago. I asked this question at the time. My question is, has the state of California provided a water study that confirms our water resources can support the number of housing units they're seeking?
Paul, do you have an answer for that?
I don't believe that to be a fact, honestly, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's something that we can look into perhaps.
Yeah, I do. The answer to that question is no. There are a lot of competing interests and conflicting state laws, obviously, there. Regarding water, what we do have to definitely demonstrate that there is, the infrastructure is there. And if there is not water, then there are plans to try to get more water in the future. But it doesn't, it's the same thing that, you do your good faith effort, you make sure that you try to secure water, but it doesn't obligate you to provide the water.
The next one is why did the city choose not to do affordable housing on Imperial Avenue?
We answered that question earlier.
Yeah. How would low-income families be able to buy this low-income housing? Would they only be for rent but not for future owners?
We also answered that question.
Okay. Let's see. The next couple are a little out of. Okay, so the next one's from Myra Perez, but they're talking about renting affordable homes, but not owning affordable housing, how are we going to also have the opportunity for our young adults to buy affordable housing in the city? I think we've answered that as well. Let's see. Is there a plan to build tiny homes at Doc Weiler's parking lot for the homeless?
I'm trying to get to them. I don't think, yeah, that I don't know the answer to it, but not that I'm aware of there's a plan, but Paul would.
I think I've heard the rumor that the city of LA is considering something like that, or the county of LA, of some temporary housing perhaps, or shelters at Doc Weiler, but I don't have a lot of details on
that. I've seen a proposal by an LA city councilman to put hundreds of free time. Oh no, that's the same question, I believe. Would the city of El Segundo be able to count affordable homes for homeless as units as, sorry, would the city of El Segundo be able to count homes for the homeless in local beach parking lots as affordable units?
I can answer that. No, the regional housing needs allocation only counts new construction of permanent housing. If it's temporary housing, then no. I think, but then certainly the housing element does cover the housing needs of the homeless, so there may be other programs and policies in place for the homeless population.
Great. I'm kind of going through the rest of the questions here, and it looks like they aren't really questions. So I think we might be done, unless anyone else wants to raise their hand.
Just give people a few more seconds to decide if they want to speak or not, and then we're gonna close it off.
Oh, we have one hand raised by Rachel. All right, Rachel.
Hi, thanks everybody again. I just wanted to say, you know, I hope that we don't miss out on an opportunity to really give people a chance to buy homes in this wonderful city that are affordable. I know you talked about doing something as a parallel process with, and it's not necessarily being included and part of what you're talking about here tonight, but it's a little kind of disappointing knowing what happened with the Imperial apartments or the housing there. And I mean, El Segundo is really a beautiful, wonderful city. And I think it'd be great if you guys could truly consider bringing in an opportunity for people to be able to afford and buy houses and be a part of this community, not just rent here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Rachel. With that, let's see. Do we have any other written questions?
Some are coming in right now. I'm sorry if I missed this, but are we definitely going to proceed with this project? Will there be a vote on it?
Eventually, yeah, the Planning Commission and City Council will make decisions on the housing element. Mm-hmm.
And much of the charm of El Segundo is due to the parks, green space, and open space. How will this plan make sure to maintain that?
I'll take that real quickly. We're discussing the city's housing element at this point, so it primarily focuses on housing. There are other parts of the general plan that focus more on open space, green space. So those are required. So in other parts of the general plan, we focus more on green spaces is the short answer to that question.
Paul, you were just muted.
Yeah, well, with that, I think I want to thank for participating in this meeting. We received a lot of valuable input and a lot of good questions. I would like to encourage all of you to stay engaged. Please visit our website, elsegundo.org/housing housing-element. To find out more and get updates about this process, please take our survey. We have until May 17th, right, Gina? So you have plenty of time to go on our website and take that survey. Feel free to email me or call me if you have questions. And we look forward to having you along the way during this whole process. Thank you, everybody, and please have a great night. And thank you, everybody on the panel.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.